Assalamu alaikum, dear class 9 science students. This is Muhammad Gyasuddin, physics lecturer of KC Model School and College. Welcome to the Force Chapter 3 class. It's a third chapter. Its name is Force. This is the topic picture of the chapter. Dear students, weightlifting by South Asian Games gold medal winner Mabia Akhtar Shimanta. Dear students, we discussed about the motion of objects in earlier chapter, but we did not discuss about the reason of motion. In this chapter, we'll see that motion is created due to force, and we'll also discuss about three devices laws of Isaac Newton regarding force. Dear students, at the time of discussion of how force acts on the object, very necessarily topics like different types of force, inertia of body, nature of force, frictional force, etc. come into our discussion. Dear students, by the end of the chapter, you will be able to explain the inertia of object and qualitative concept of force by applying Newton's first law of motion. Dear student, you can explain the nature of fundamental forces. We can explain influence of balanced and unbalanced forces. Dear students, you can explain momentum and collision of objects. You can analyze the influence of force on the motion of an object. Dear students, you can measure the force by applying Newton's second law of motion. You can explain the action and reaction force by Newton's third law of motion. Dear students, you can explain influence of motion and force of our safe traveling. You can explain conservation laws of momentum and collision. Dear students, you can explain different types of frictions and frictional force. You can analyze the influence of friction on the motion of an object. You can describe the means to increase or decrease friction. Dear students, you can explain the positive impact of friction in our daily life. Dear students, we discussed about the motion of objects in earlier chapter, but we did not discuss about the reason of motion. In this chapter, we'll see that motion is created due to force, and we'll also discuss about three devices laws of Isaac Newton regarding force. Tell me, what is state of rest and what is state of motion? State of rest, when an object doesn't change its position, that is relative to an observer, the object is considered at rest, and this state of object is called rest. Such as the building, your reading table. Okay. State of motion. What is state of motion? When an object changes its position with time, related to an observer, then the object is called to be in motion and object is in a state of motion, such as a moving car, moving bus, moving rickshaw. Now, my dear students, what is force? Force is any influence capable of producing a change of state of rest or of motion of an object, or a force is that which changes or tends to change the state of a body. Okay. Now, characteristics of force. Okay, we are going to know characteristics of force. Force has direction, since pull and push has both magnitude and direction, so force is a vector quantity. Look at this figure. Somebody is pushing and someone is pulling. That means force is push and pull, and it has direction. Force is always applied in pairs. Dear students, if the object A applies force on B, then the object B also applies force on A. Look at this picture, then you can understand. The table B exerts force on the ball of purse, which is I, and the ball of purse exerts force on table W. I guess A and B applies force on each other. You have understood. State of motion. What is state of motion? When an object changes its position with time related to an observer, then the object is called to be in motion and object is in a state of motion, such as a moving car, moving bus, moving animation. Look at this animation. What can you see? You can see velocity and acceleration are changes due to force of gravitation. Look at again, velocity and acceleration changes are changing due to force of gravitation. Dear students, you can explain momentum and collision of objects. You can analyze the influence of force on the motion of an object. Dear students, you can measure the look at this picture. This is rubber. There are different shapes of rubber, for which cause this shape because of application of force. Okay, by applying force you can change different shape of the rubber. Dear students, kinds of force. There are two types of force. One is fundamental force, second direct force. Now we are going to understand fundamental force. Okay, fundamental force. What do you mean by fundamental force? Those forces which are fundamental or independent, that don't originate from other forces and are a form of any other forces, but all other forces can be produced in terms of those forces are called fundamental forces. There are four kinds of fundamental forces, you know. One is gravitational force, electromagnetic force, a strong nuclear force, and fourth, weak nuclear force. These are fundamental forces. Now, what is gravitational force? The force of attraction between any two objects of the universe due to mass is called gravitation. Look at this picture. You can understand due to the gravitational force the planets rotate the sun. You know this. What is electromagnetic force? The force of attraction and repulsion applied by two charged particles due to their charges is called the electromagnetic force. Look at this picture, dear students. You can understand from this picture proton between proton and electron there is force of electromagnetic. Now, my dear students, what is the strong nuclear force? The force that keep the nuclear elements of the nucleus together is called strong nuclear force. Dear students, look at this picture. There is proton and neutron in the nucleus. The force between proton or neutron proton is a strong nuclear force. I am sure you have understood what is strong nuclear force. Now come to the weak nuclear force. What do you understand by weak nuclear force? Though there is powerful nuclear force in nucleus, but there are some nucleus which are unstable. This unstable nucleus is called radioactive nucleus. For this weak nucleus, beta particle emits. This weak force is attractive type, short range base, and charge neutral. For boson named fundamental particles exchanging between two particles, this force is activated. Scientists assume. Dear students, you look at this two picture, then you may understand a bit. This is the symbol of beta decay, and beta decay means electron. Okay. Dear students, at the time of discussion of how force acts on the object, very necessarily topics like different types of force, inertia of body, nature of force, frictional force, etc. come into our discussion. Dear students, now you will understand contact or touch force, non-contact or untouched force. What is contact force? What is contact force? The force for which creation a direct contact between two objects is essential to be happened is called contact force. But non-contact force which creation direct contact between two objects is not necessary is called non-contact or untouched force, such as gravitational force and magnetic force are non-contact force. A contact force, frictional force. Frictional force is contact force. You can understand from this figure. Now, my dear students, what is conservative force? A force is said to be conservative if the work done by the force on a particle in round trip is 0. That is conservative force. The spring has conservative force. This spring has conservative force. You can understand more later. Okay. Now, what is non-conservative force? Non-conservative force. A force is said to be non-conservative if the work done by force on a particle in a round trip is not zero. That is non-conservative force. Friction has non-conservative force. Dear students, now what is centripetal force? When an object revolves around a path, the force that acts on the object in the direction to the center of the circle so that it keeps the object in a rotational motion is called centripetal force. Dear students, you may understand the centripetal force from this picture. Somebody is rotating something. The red sign means centripetal force. It acts to the center. Okay. Now you will understand what is centrifugal force. This the force which acts on the object to rotate it in a circular path is called centrifugal force. Look at this figure, dear student. Then you can understand what is centrifugal force. Somebody is rotating something. Look at the red sign, that is working outward. Okay, this is centrifugal force. Now, my dear student, what is impulsive force? If a force of very high magnitude acts for a very short time, then it is called impulsive force. Dear students, you look at this picture, then you can understand what is impulsive force. The cricket hits the ball. This is an impulsive force because it needs very short time, but magnitude very high. Okay. Homework. It is non-conservative force. Non-conservative force. A force is said to be non-conservative if the work done by force on a particle in a round trip is not zero. That is non-conservative force. Friction has non-conservative force. What is called Newton's law of motion? What is called Newton's first law of motion? What is called Newton's second law of motion? What is called Newton's third law of motion? Dear students, what is called momentum? What is collision? What is called frictional force? How many types of frictional force? What is called conservative force? What is called non-conservative force? What is called centripetal force? What is called centrifugal force? What is called impulsive force? These are homework. Look at this question, then answer. When a piece of cloth is shaken, the water droplets fall down. Which law of motion explains it? Swimming in the pond, then which law of motion explains it? Now, what is gravitational force? The force of attraction between any two objects of the universe due to mass.